Hello, juniors. Welcome back to our study of the book of James. Reminder today that we're going to jump ahead a little bit because I already did a lesson with our seniors a couple weeks ago in the middle of chapter 4. And so we kind of jumped ahead, did that, and we fell back to where we were, and now we're moving ahead. So we're going to skip the middle part of chapter 4. And that's why we're doing that, because we already covered that again, I'd say a couple weeks ago. We did that. So today, as I share my screen here, we're going to be on chapter 4, verse 13 is where we're going to start here today, the Christian and his boasting. If you remember back to the early part, I gave you an outline of the entire book, and each one kind of had a main heading, and this is the one that we've made it to. This is the sixth main heading, the Christian and his boasting. And it goes from chapter 4, verse 13 to the first part of chapter 5. And it kind of goes over again some of the parts that we've already talked about. And so we're going to mention it and then go forward pretty fast. And chapter 4 is the part that we've already mentioned. So I'm going to touch on it again and just remind you and refer you to the earlier chapter video. But you have to remember to make God's will a part of your plans. Don't make plans number one, where you ignore God's will. That's not where we want to be in a complex life, in an uncertain life, and some of those things. The verses there say, "Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we'll go to such and such a city, spend a year, engage in business, and make a profit." It's just this concept of a life without God. It's different than an atheist in practice, but really not any different in concept. Atheist, says, "I know there's no God. I'm going to live like that." Christians who make plans apart from God are living that same way. I'll do what I want to, and then God's over here if He wants to bless it or be in it, or I'll tell God what I want to do, and He can bless me as I do those things. It's just living without this idea of God's presence, and it's just not a good idea. And so we need to remember that. And so that's what a lot of this is for. But verse 17 I want to speak to really quickly before we go on here. Disobeying God's will. Here's what verse 17 says. "Therefore, to one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is a sin." This verse is important because it covers a lot of things we might call gray areas for Christians. Or we might say, well, I'm not sure about this. I think this is what Scripture says. I know it's what God wants me to do, but I'm not commanded, so I don't have to. If you know you ought to do something and it lines up with Scripture and you abstain from it, then this verse jumps up and gets you. If you know how you ought to live and you refuse to do it or don't fall into it, then it's a sin. And Scripture is clear about that. So you have to be careful when we deliberately disobey God's will and when we live a life apart from God's will. Those are not places that we want to be. Okay? So those are our plans, boasting about our plans. Now I want us to think today about boasting about our prosperity. Chapter 5, verse 1. "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments have become moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver have rusted. Their rust will be a witness against you, and will consume your flesh like fire. It is in the last days that you have stored up your treasure. Behold, the pay of your laborers who mowed your fields, and which has been withheld by you, cries out against you. The outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord of the Sabbath. You have lived luxuriously on the earth and led a life of want and pleasure. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and put to death the righteous man. He does not resist you." So when we think about prosperity, number one, we have to remember the Bible never condemns wealth. Okay? It simply doesn't. It never says that it's wrong to possess things or to have nice things or even have extra of things. It does condemn wealth that is gotten in the wrong way, by stealing from others or by allowing others' misfortune to encourage you. Christians have to wrestle with that. When we think about something like the lottery, we might say, well, that doesn't take money from anybody. Well, it really does, because the lottery is funded by the majority of people that buy tickets and don't win. And that's where a lot of that money comes from. You have to remember and look at the statistics. A lot of the lottery tickets, most of the lottery tickets, in fact, are bought by people who don't really have the money to afford to buy lottery tickets. The tax on a tax on the most poor many times. And so I'm not a fan of it for that reason. I think it makes our poverty problems worse by luring them with this idea. The also thing about money is, again, having it's not bad per se, but remember what that verse says: the love of money is the fruit of all sorts of evil. You have to be careful if that's your motivation, if that's the only thing you want to do is make a lot of money, you're going to find it hollow. You're not going to find that it gives you that satisfaction that you would like for it to have, whether it's in a job or in whatever. Sure, I mean, of course, having money is a nice thing. Having extra money to be able to do some fun stuff or some extra stuff, of course, is a nice thing. But when those things start possessing you instead of you possessing them, so it's okay to possess stuff. It's not okay for stuff to possess you. And so we have to be careful there. So the Bible does condemn it if it's gotten the wrong way. And James describes that here. This money had been held back from those who were laboring and who were working. And James says that's a major problem. The Old Testament says this here in Deuteronomy 24 and Leviticus 19, Jeremiah 22. Lots of places where it talks about keeping it back. And that just means withholding stuff because you want more of it. It's not, the right way to hold back from these people who are rich and keeping it back from those who need it. So that's part of it. It's use. He says, you have condemned and put to death a righteous man. He does not resist you. Or do not the rich men oppress you and draw you before the judgment seat. There was a system in Israel. So James, again, is Jewish background, so he's going to write about some of those things. We need to know those contexts. And I give you some of the rules for that legal system here. You can see them with me here in your notes. Judges weren't supposed to be greedy. Judges were not supposed to be partial to the rich or the poor. You weren't supposed to lie. You weren't supposed to give bribes. However, if you have a poor person and a rich person going to court against each other, money hires the best lawyers. Money hires the majority of lawyers. And because people are sinful, money changes hands and bribes all the time. And that's just part of the legal system. I'm afraid that's still part of the legal system here today. We've mentioned in class, I firmly believe if O.J. Simpson wasn't very wealthy, he wouldn't have been able to afford the lawyers that he got. He wouldn't have gotten off from that charge. And that's just the truth of it. If he was, an average citizen and had been accused of that crime, he'd probably be in jail right now. But because he was a wealthy athlete, he was able to get off of that charge. So we have to be careful about stuff like that. So that's what this verse is talking about, this court system. And the real concept here is this idea of money making people unequal. Okay, we should never look at anyone where we think, well, I've got money and they don't, so I'm a little better than them, or I'm a little higher than them, or God loves me more than them, which again is some of the health and wealth gospel people that I drop about all the time. If God loves you, if he gives you a lot of stuff, and if he blesses you with a lot of health and a lot of money and financial stuff. Well, the reason they preach that is because they want that. And so they get people to send them money, and then they live big, and the people that send them money have nothing, which is another reason I'm just so angry at them. They take money from the poor families that really can't afford to give some TV preacher money to buy another jet or another house or something ridiculous like that. And so I don't believe God's going to be pleased with that based on what we read in his word. So we're to seek God, not work ourselves weary to gain wealth. We're to go to God and him to be our goal, what we're working toward. We should not be consumed by our money. He says in verse 3, your gold and silver have rusted. Their rust will be a witness against you and will consume your flesh like fire. And it is in the last days that you have stored up for your treasure. We shouldn't hoard stuff. Now, what's the difference between saving for our future and hoarding? Well, it could be a little bit gray between those two things. It's okay to save money. It's okay to put money away for the future, for retirement, to buy certain things, to make purchases down the road. Some of those things are okay. How much, though, is too much when you start keeping all the stuff to yourself and not allowing other people to have it? So one of the ideas lately, let's just talk about, is the stimulus checks. So the government wanted to send out these stimulus checks. The concept there was if they send people money, they'll go spend it on businesses and it'll get the economy going again. It'll help the person that gets the money to buy things they need, plus it'll help the businesses to get started again. Okay, and that is a concept that is kind of how capitalism is supposed to work. Here comes some money. You put the money back into the economy, and it flows through, and that money helps 5 or 6 different people as it makes the rounds. Well, let's say, that there's only 1 or 2 people that have all the money, and they don't spend any of it. They don't go to any businesses. They don't, help anybody else in the economy. Well, then hoarding all that money is not helpful. It doesn't mean we should spend everything that we have. It doesn't mean that we should save everything that we have either. It's somewhere in the middle of those things, because ultimately, if we hoard stuff for ourselves, and I'll make a point of this here in the notes, is that if we hoard stuff for ourselves, we're not trusting that God's going to supply what we need later. Okay. Again, I've got money in savings. I've got a little bit of money in retirement and some of those things, because that's okay, I think, to make a plan. But if all I did was try to get as much stuff as I can and not let anybody else ever have access to it, then those things are possessing me instead of me possessing them. And again, we have that same problem. Verse 4, behold, you pay the laborers who mowed your fields, which has been withheld by you, cries out against you. Keeping it for your own pleasure is not what you should do either. Hoarding money and hanging on to it, either for your own pleasure or, verse 5, for your luxury. You've lived luxuriously on the earth, a life of want and pleasure. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. So these are not good things. Keeping it for yourself or spending it on stuff that you don't need. And we got so many big movie stars and athletes buying stuff they don't need. And then they'll come on, with this, a few nights ago, they had this telethon, how we could help all the restaurants and donate stuff. And come on, dude, you're killing me. They have enough they could donate and take care of so many of these problems. And again, I'm not saying they should do that necessarily, although many of them have a lot more than they certainly need or will ever use. But them telling us that we need to dig deep and donate sometimes seems hypocritical when they have so much more that they could give. They've got 5 or 6 houses, and then we're supposed to, give instead of paying our own mortgage for our one small house that we have, or whatever. It's just that idea. It's again these ideas of possessions and whether we have them or if they have us. You need to remember we have more than most people around the globe, and God's going to judge us for that. Not necessarily in a harsh way. Again, it's okay to have possessions, but we need to be good stewards of those possessions. Take good care of them. James has said here in verse 5, we've lived luxuriously in a day of slaughter, meaning we've had way extra while some people have literally had nothing. And that shouldn't be the case either. Now, it doesn't mean we should take what you've earned and give it away just because you have it when they haven't worked to earn anything. But there is this idea of, if you have extra, be willing to share that with maybe someone who doesn't have enough, who we could help with. Again, not as the government doing it in a socialist sort of way, but as we as believers doing it to help others out, just to take care of other people. And that's something we should be doing. Why? Because riches vanish. 50 years from now, everything that I own, if it still exists, somebody else will own it. It's going to go away. I will not possess it anymore. Somebody else is going to have it. So why am I worried about hanging on to all of it right now when it's not even mine forever? Just a short period of time. Riches destroy character. I could tell you guys stories, sadly, as a pastor. Many times I'm called when a loved one is sick or when they pass away, and a lot of times I'm one of the first people to go to a house after a death. And I just can't tell you the number of times, even in those minutes and hours right after someone has passed away, families start fighting over stuff. I tell you what, you just start giving a little bit of free something, and you watch people just go nuts. They lose all of their character, lose all of who they are. You prove it with 2 words: Black Friday. Oh, the crock pot's down 20%. All of a sudden, people are running over each other and fighting to get something that they probably don't even need anyway. We'll multiply that by a lot. We talk about a lot of riches. It destroys character. And riches ultimately may lead to judgment. If we're not careful, God says we will be judged for those things. What will be those judgments? Witnesses, our own riches, the wages we've held back from others, and then the workers themselves. And James lays all these things out in these verses. Okay? So again, just be careful as you move forward in life with what you possess and what you decide to do with your time and your talent and your energy. And be sure those are things that are godly things, things that will glorify and honor Him. Okay? So again, the end of chapter 4, start of chapter 5 is this: don't leave God out of your plans. And then chapter 5, don't be so motivated by riches and wealth and power and influence. Those things are fleeting, and they simply won't last very long. Okay, so that's the lessons here in chapter 4 and chapter 5. Guys, guess what? One lecture left. I'll post this Wednesday. One more lecture on the rest of chapter 5, and we're going to wrap it up. Obviously, we have not studied this as in-depth as we could have if we had been together every day and in class and that sort of thing. But I hope it's been valuable. I hope that you've learned something from it. I know the answers you guys have given me on your homework have been great. Y'all done a really good job with that. So I really appreciate you, juniors, and your faithfulness in that. Miss you. Love you guys. I want you to know that every single day and every time I get to talk to you. But anyway, your assignments will be via email, and you'll get those with the due dates and all that. Be sure you watch due dates and things. I changed up a little bit every week just to do some different things and because of other stuff going on. So take care that you watch those. All right. I will talk to you guys again soon. Until I see you, go serve your king.